We're ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you, most of you again. For those who don't remember, my name is Gary Bassett. I'm also the mayor for the village of Rhinebeck and the chairman for our Hudson 7 organization. We are calling this meeting, or this workshop today, which is hosted by Hudson 7 with our guest Transmission Development, TDI, who will address Hudson 7's questions and concerns regarding the Champlain Hudson Power Express proposal. Our goal today is to really collect as much information as possible. TDI was at our last meeting and really did not have sufficient time to present all of the information, so we want to make that available for them today. And our next step as a drinking water intermunicipal council have yet to be determined. Okay. But before we begin, I'd also like to just confirm a quorum. And when I call your name, please identify yourself when you hear your municipality called. Town of Rhinebeck. Town of Hyde Park.
Here.
Neil. Town of Poughkeepsie. Town of Esopus.
Sorry there, yes, Evelyn Clark.
Town of Lloyd. City of Poughkeepsie.
Present.
All right.
That would be me, Randy.
Yes, hi, Randy. We also have non-voting members attending. Anybody from the town of Hyde Park? Randy, besides you? I
From
mean,
the city of Poughkeepsie.
excuse me, yeah. Town of Poughkeepsie is Randy. Town of Esopus,
Yes.
hi, Mark. Town of Lloyd. City of Poughkeepsie.
Yes.
And then our technical advisors, please identify yourself.
I see Shannon there.
So Emily Svensson. Raise your hand, please, Emily.
From Riverkeeper.
Dan Chapley. Paul
Paul
Malrose.
Malrose.
I think that's it, right? Okay. All right. So we welcome everybody. We welcome all the municipalities that are here, our county and state representatives, and any agencies attending today for this workshop, and the public who may be watching our workshop on Hudson 7's YouTube channel. If you're on the Zoom call with us today, we ask that you just mute yourself when you're not speaking. If there is time for questions at the end of today's presentation, please raise your hand and you will be identified. We will be given priority to Hudson 7 members and Hudson 7 technical advisors. And if time allows, we will then proceed to our guests. And if you're a guest, please identify yourself by raising your hand or stating your name, and you will be called upon to ask your question. We welcome all of our guests from TDI today. Sean, right, Jean, and Jennifer for today's presentation. So with that, I'd like to get started and let's go. Who's gonna kick off, Gene?
Yes, I'm going to kick off, and then I'm going to pat. Sean and I are going to tag team here. So I will start. So thank you for inviting us back, and thank you for giving us adequate time. Certainly, we also appreciate getting these questions in advance so we could spend the time to give you guys a considered reply. The Champlain Hudson Power Express project has been part of New York State clean energy discussions for now over a decade. The project, after years of development, is in possession of all major permits required to commence construction. These permits required numerous submissions confirming plans and field conditions, all examined through a comprehensive 4-year process before they were granted. Environmental considerations involve New York State and federal agencies, including New York DEC, New York DPS, New York DOT, New York PSC, US ACE, US DOE, NOAA, US Fish and Wildlife Service, and Hudson River stewards such as Riverkeeper and Scenic Hudson. Public water system impacts were an important consideration, influencing installation methods, including establishing current Hudson River conditions, soliciting PWS operators, hiring water quality experts, and establishing consensus testing methodologies. The committee did conduct a survey with 12 water systems along Lake Champlain and the Hudson River in the spring of 2011. CHPE was granted permits from all required major regulatory agencies, indicating that the project design and route were acceptable, the project was beneficial to the public, and that environmental concerns had been assessed, addressed, and mitigated as necessary. The project is now in the final stages of pre-construction planning, which include the following activities related to the Hudson 7 water intakes between now and 2025, when CHPE's HVDC sea cables are proposed to be installed in the Hudson River. One, briefing the New York Department of Health and Ulster County and Dutchess County Department of Health. Updated consultation with the operators of the water intakes within the Hudson River to better understand current operations, current monitoring of water quality, and backup capabilities. Hiring of consultants with expertise in water quality monitoring to further develop formal plans for conducting certain monitoring activities prior to and during installation, and advancing the in-water route design, including finalizing location of the cables in relation to the intakes. As we go through this presentation, we hope there will be several takeaways. First, the review process at the state and federal level relied heavily upon objective scientific analysis and data. We believe that the permitting record is abundantly clear that the federal and state agencies, as well as NGOs and other entities that participated in the state review, required a high level of scientific rigor. The regulatory record demonstrates the protection of public drinking water was thoroughly considered and mandated during the regulatory review, evidenced by protective measures provided in the New York Public Service Commission Article 7 certificate conditions. It is also a matter of public record that Riverkeeper and other environmental stakeholders applied for intervenor funds to engage an independent firm to review the project, including discussion of the potential impacts of the project on public water supplies. The Hudson 7 questions we're going to go into. I'm going to take the first one and then pass the baton to Dr. Murphy. What is the status of the CHPE project with the New York City Mayor and the New York City Governor? The New York City Mayor and the New York City Governor have both publicly stated that transmitting Canadian renewable energy to New York City is critical to meet the state's and the city's ambitious renewable energy mandates. Both Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo have publicly stated their support for CHPE and the supply of said Canadian hydro. We believe CHPE will be one part of the many solutions required to reduce the impacts of climate change. Dr. Murphy?
Can you all see my the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes,
Sorry,
we,
can you hear me?
yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the second question relates to DOH review of the project. So the New York State DOH has been briefed about the concerns expressed by the Hudson 7. We are planning on doing additional consultation with the DOH to keep them fully informed, but we also know that we need to meet not just with the New York State DOH, but also with the county DOH.
And I see tonight Jim Teed is with the county DOH for you to watch this tonight.
Great.
Just so you know.
And we look forward to that conversation. And this question here relates to correspondence between DOH and CHPE. So
Gene, I have a question about the other one. You said
so
that,
Paul, as we talked about on Tuesday, we will not get through this presentation in 2 hours if we take questions in the middle of it.
okay,
I mean, we're 15 minutes in and we're on question 2 or so. So I hope there'll be an opportunity at the end to it, but some of these questions are pretty technical. And if, my apologies for being sort of brushed about it, but you've got a lot of great questions. We want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to hear the answers.
No, that's fine, Sean. This is Gary. As I said in the beginning of the meeting, I would like to ask everybody, including Hudson 7 members, to hold their questions to the end.
Appreciate that. Yeah, so the question here relates to correspondence, and we understand that this is an issue, but the reality is that as part of the settlement conversations, those are protected by New York State Public Service Commission regulations. Communications are considered confidential, and we're just not permitted to provide copies of those communications or any other documents that were developed as part of the settlement process. And I think there are members of your technical committee who can confirm, because they were part of the process as well, that the documents produced as part of settlement and subsequent confidential communications are just under the same restrictions there. Question 4 relates to public outreach programs. And I think I want to be clear here that the project went through all of the public notice requirements for both the state level and the federal processes while we were going through the regulatory review process. That included public meetings at various places along the state, that included newspaper notices and things of that sort. We have started recently beginning the early stages of consultation with owners of infrastructure as required by the project, and the EMC itself will be a public document available for the public to weigh in on. We're happy to talk if the Hudson 7 has recommendations about additional elements of a public outreach program that might be appropriate, because we are committed to making sure the public understands, the construction process that's being undertaken, the measures being taken in for protective measures along the way, and that we'll have staff available throughout the construction process to answer any questions. Question 5 talks about the next few sets of questions deal with the terrestrial routing. And I think what we primarily want to say here is that the review of the project routing was intensive. It went over a multi-month period, and there was a specific focus from the very beginning of the project on locating the cables outside of waters to the extent practical and feasible. We completed an alternative analysis for the New York State Department of State as part of their consistency certificate, because this is not an in-water use. We need to demonstrate that we were, that we had done appropriate level of alternatives analysis. For the Army Corps, we had to complete what's called a least environmentally damaging practical alternative analysis, which also looked at extensive and entirely overland routes. And at the end of the process, the reviews and alternate reviews resulted in the current route alignment. Question number 6 addresses the Pilgrim pipeline. So we're not familiar with the specifics of the Pilgrim pipeline, where they are in their process, with the availability of that. But I will say that the LEDPA analysis submitted to the Army Corps of Engineers consider routes that were entirely buried. And the Army Corps of Engineers agreed that this approach was not practical based on their considerations for that evaluation. And I apologize again for speaking very quickly, but I do want to see if we can have any time at the end for questions. So if I'm talking too fast, let me know. Question 7 deals with a terrestrial route. Again, and it's specifically they're asking about the rerouting that's been occurring. And there has been some rerouting in the upland routes where, based on the more detailed engineering and constructability analysis, we've determined the route as permitted was not feasible because of changes that others have made, or where, in that intervening period, or where a more effective or efficient route exists. These reroutes have been limited, and they've been located in the same habitat regime as considered during the permitting process. When I say limited, I mean less than 10% of the entire route. And they've all been approved at this point by the New York State Public Service Commission. The next question addresses the portion of the section of the route north of Ulster and Dutchess, which is terrestrial, and wonders why the terrestrial route was done there but not down below. And let me just sort of bring this up. The New York State Department of Public Service, from the very outset, I think this is from October of 2010, presented an alternative route that'd be overland, basically going from Bethlehem down through Clarkstown, which is south of your area of interest. This route was extensively examined in multiple documents. If you want to go and look at the record for this project, you'd find exhibits 86 and 87 of the joint proposal, provided mile by mile analysis of all the routing. I should say that this alternative route was put forward because the original project was almost entirely in water. So it was basically a result of a long review and evaluation, step by step. And at the end of the process, the joint proposal states that the alternatives analysis demonstrated that there was no feasible alternative to locating the HVD transmission system in the Hudson River between Cement and Haverstraw Bay. So, and again, I want to make sure that people understand that the joint proposal of settlement was signed by all of the state agencies who participated. It was signed by 3 NGOs, environmentally based NGOs, and 1 utility, as well as the municipalities, City of New York, and I think 1 other one. So this is not, a small joint proposal just to limited parties. Multiple agencies and other participants were part of the review process here. The next question talks about the cable routing, and talks about why the CSX corridor could not be used in Ulster because of the second track, but why can it be used in Green? And again, this goes back to that this analysis was done. It was an extensive review of the project. It was looked at mile by mile. It involved consultation with CSX. It involved consultation with transportation agencies. And the reality is that this route right here is fixed by the issues permits and the engineering and the construction contracts. And it has been part of the planning landscape for CSX for the intervening 10 years. I mean, time has passed since it's been proposed, but CSX is aware of this project and aware that we'll be located within their right of way in this location. The next set of questions sort of talk about what are related to if an overland route is not possible. And you'd like to review latest confidential drawings that show the project route location of Hudson 7 intakes. So we're not entirely sure what confidential drawings you're referring to here. We don't have any confidential internal documents. We have the documents that show where the route is. We'd be happy to provide that to you. And we have the locations of the Hudson 7 intakes, but we honestly, it feels like the Hudson 7 have as good, if not better, information. If we have those locations, it's because when we met with your operators, they gave it to us. We didn't identify intake locations on any maps because at the time we were doing the permitting, it was suggested that could represent a security concern. But we would be happy to have a more detailed conversation with the cable locations relative to the intakes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get down below. Question 11. Transmission cables should be relocated on the other side of the esophagus intake. This is one of these areas where we would like to consult directly with the intake operator for that facility regarding the location of their intake and our route, and work through what the relationship is between those. Similarly, for the next question, it talks about the cable route running between the two intakes. It asks about how the construction will be performed. And again, this is a situation where we intend and expect to consult with the facility operator regarding the specific route in this area and the location of the intake system. But we're confident that ultimately there'll be no impact to this intake system. Question 13, has TDI coordinated the project with the Central Hudson MGP project? We have not coordinated with them in any formal way. What we have done is confirmed that the current routing does not intersect with their dredging area. And I should say that this is one of these areas where we need to look at what their schedule is in relation to our schedule to determine what the potential for interaction is. Question 14 addresses the pilot program. And what we can say here is that we are committed by the certificate conditions to pick a location for a jet plow trial location in the Hudson River. And we are open to having that location be within the range of the Hudson 7 area of interest, subject to approval, as always, by the New York State Department of Public Service and in consultation with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. We want to be clear that the jet plow will be for a limited distance. And we also, this is the underwater video of the cameraing. We're happy to talk about this, but we don't find that a particularly useful tool for understanding sediment dispersal. We think it is much more important to be monitoring total suspended solids and TSS and turbidity, which is something we have committed to and is part of our certificate condition as well as our scope of services for the test run. All right, number 15. So jet plow technology is proposed for use in the Hudson River, but other technologies proposed for use in other parts, including shear plow technology and horizontal. So I think the important thing to start off with here is that the jet plow technology for a installation, as we're talking about here, where you're installing the cables as you are doing the creating the trench, is pretty much universally recognized by the regulatory community as the most efficient way and the most environmentally beneficial way of installing cables. And I feel like we need to take a quick moment to talk about this. The jet plow equipment is essentially taking pressurized water aboard the vessel, and it's plowing, it's jetting out that water so as to fluidize the sediments and create the trench, and continuing installing the cables at the required depth at the same time. So the water jetting device is fitted with a hydraulic pressure nozzle. It's located down the length of a swords, which are inserted into the sediment on either side of the cable. It essentially is a long stick type protuberance with holes coming out of it for pressurized water to be sort of pushed out of it to create the trench. And it's creating a direct downward and backward sweep flow within the trench. So it's not pushing straight down onto the bottom like we saw in the video that we saw last time we were all together, but it is directly pushing downwards and backwards. And because of that, resuspended sediments within the trench are going to be more likely to settle within the trench under their own weight. So yeah, and again, the jet plow forces are not forcing an upward movement of sediment in the water column. It's not pushing it upward, it's pushing downward and back. There was monitoring conducted during the Hudson Transmission Partners project, which is located in the lower Hudson, that determined about 70 to 80% of the disturbed sediment would be expected to, was expected to settle right back within the limits of the trench under the installation. And this is a similar installation technique to what we'd be using here. And the installation technique is extremely different from mechanical dredging and other trenching operations where the objective is to lift up and remove the sediment from a wide area. This embedment method for underwater cable installation is, as I said earlier, considered, the most effective and least environmentally impactful by state and federal agencies. This question asked about the use of other technologies. The shear plow technology is used in Lake Champlain because it is in a very specific section of Lake Champlain where it's a very narrow waterway. And where the barrel, and it's also a situation where the barrel depth is only down to 4 feet. The shear plow is essentially a boat pulling a plow like you'd see a farmer with his field. And so it's only possible in situations where you have shallower barrel depths, so less than 5 feet, and a certain type of sediment cohesiveness, which we couldn't say would be necessarily the case along the entire route within the Hudson. So we feel like the shear plow, first of all, isn't going to work because we have requirements in terms of burial depth that have been worked out through with the U.S. Coast Guard and with the maritime community. But we also, the sediments are not necessarily conducive for that type of technology. The other technology that's put forward as potential use is the horizontal directional drilling. Horizontal directional drilling is an excellent technique when you have a short length, up to 3,000 or so feet. But it requires you're basically putting a hole in the ground, the cables go underground and pop up in another location. It's extremely hard to, it is a precise process when you're doing a land to land one. It is more complicated when you're doing a land to water one, and becomes even more complicated when you're doing a water from water one. Plus the amount of time that we would spend in the water I don't think anybody would be happy with the fact that we were every 3,000 feet being in the water poking holes in the ground. So let me go to question 14 or 16, sorry. This one addresses the jet plow churning up sediments and asking about what the likely suspended solids are. So as I talked about previously, monitoring done within the Hudson River for another similar project determined that approximately 70 to 80% of the disturbed sediment will remain within the limits of the trench. And these results are very consistent with what we've seen for other jet plow technology work that's been done both in the US and abroad. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the what it looks like compared to what we saw in the video when we were all together. The video that was depicted at the last meeting showed a shallow installation of a cable that was laid on the ground in the sand in an ocean environment. That's just not applicable to what we're talking about here. What we're going to be doing here is we're going to be the cables will be installing the trench first, again using the downward and backwards pressurized flow to install, and the cables will be put in directly afterwards. The cables will sink in somewhat according to their weight. And again, because you're in a trench that has walls to it, the sediment has some place to go. A really narrow trench like we saw last time just isn't conducive for exactly the kind of sediment settling that we expect to see and have seen for other projects. This next question first addresses a comments provided to us by a Dr. Chent from Rutgers University. And we did read through the comments. We thought they were interesting. Well, we definitely want to have a conversation with Dr. Chent to understand sort of where his primary points were. But we're not comfortable commenting on or critiquing his statements because it looks like he was just given the PowerPoint presentation and not, for example, the water quality watering results. And it just doesn't seem fair, if you will, to offer a critique when he may not have all the information that we do going into the conversation. So again, and similar for the next, so for the next one here, he does ask some questions about in-river testing. What I can tell you is that no field testing has been completed, but we did do a three-dimensional hydrodynamic and time variable water quality model to assess water quality impacts. And again, if you're interested in looking at this, this is Exhibit 85 to the joint proposal. I would be happy to provide it to the Hudson 7 if that would be of interest to them. The model relies on sediment and contaminant data that was collected in the field along the proposed route. And this same model has been used in other settings and approved by the EPA. But again, we have not done in-field testings and expect that that would be part of the pre-construction testing that we talked about earlier. Question 19 talks about when the construction should take place. According to our permit, installation from Cementon down to New Hamburg, which encompasses your area of interest, is stipulated by both our state and federal permits to occur between August 1st and October 15th. And this is related to avoiding impacts to the sturgeon species. You know, as we talked about, we'll fully engage with the intake operators to discuss our proposed installation schedule when it's more fully developed. Sorry, next question, 20. This deals with what sampling should be done, what pollutants should be talked about, and what measures should be taken there. As we talked about in the last meeting, the environmental impact statement that was completed for this project provided a listing of all the pollutants found in the Hudson River. It's not practical or necessary for someone to do all the testing for all of the Hudson River. But what we do plan to do is consult with the public water supply operators and the Department of Health officials to ascertain what parameters are currently tested for, as well as review available sediment testing data in this area to determine what's an appropriate testing regime. Continuous monitoring for turbidity and TOCs must be conducted at the raw pipe intakes, with monitoring intervals to be determined in consultation with plant operators for all contaminants of concern. We plan to consult with the PWS operators to determine what monitoring is currently occurring for these two parameters and what additional monitoring may be appropriate. As we talked about last time, the certificate additions do include requirements that we have consultation with the operators about testing pre and post installation within the area for them. So this is completely consistent with what we've already have as a certificate condition and have already, you know, contemplated as part of our protection regime for the project. Take a quick breath here. Thank you. Question 22. This question here talks about operations being performed at night. This is not acceptable due to increase in turbidities, and petroleum cannot be observed at night. Water treatment plants have limited staff at night. So this this statement here, we feel like this is one of these ones that we need to go and talk to the operators about, because the certificate condition that that's being referenced here states that construction or pre-construction activities should take place at night or other scheduled time when operators are not operating to the extent reasonably possible. That language came from one of the suggestions, came from a suggestion given to us by one of a water intake operator. And that individual felt that, consistent with your earlier comment on 19, that construction should be occurring when demand is at the lowest. And so that person suggested, well, you should come through at night. And we've talked a little bit about this in the past, and this is the first time we've heard from anybody that coming through during the nighttime would not be acceptable. So this is one of these areas where we feel like we need to talk to the operators, get their information, get their input, and then come back again with a little bit better information. But again, this is not something that we on our own came up with. This is based on direct consultation. 23. So this question here addresses the operation will be modified if maximum contaminant levels in finished drinking water are exceeded. It talks about, the monitoring and what modifications should be considered, when they might occur. And this is another one of these ones where we again thought we had it right because we had talked to a PWS operator and this is how they suggested that we address it. But we need to go back and have another round of consultation with your operators to talk about what their current protocols are. We're, given that the high turbidity levels that can occur along the Hudson River, that we, publicly available information and were told to us by, individuals, we feel like the best way of sort of thinking about this question is to draw upon the direct experience of the operators to find out sort of what they do and how they address these situations. Question 24. This question here addresses the differential in TSS between the Hudson River and Lake Champlain. And this comes about, so we've committed to, and it talks about monitoring turbidity continuously. We've committed to monitoring both total suspended solids and turbidity during the installation using a calibration of a calibrated acoustic and optical backscatter instruments. This method isn't as accurate potentially as laboratory testing, but it does allow for in-field measurements, and we will be collecting water samples for laboratory testing in order to check the calibration of this equipment as we go through. We do think that TSS is the correct measurement to rely upon for compliance simply because it's a quantitative measure, while turbidity is more of a subjective or a subjective measure. 25 this talks about continuous monitoring, shows an increase of turbidity of 50 NTU or at TOCs by 1.5 milligrams per liter. Construction should be stopped. We would like to have consultation again with your operators, determine what their current standards are for these two parameters. We'd like to have that consultation with the state and county departments of health as well to understand how they view this from a regulatory standpoint. We don't want to create an artificial standard for this project. We want to create a standard that's been demonstrated to protect the public drinking water supply. Question 26 talks about exceedance of water quality standard for any pollutant identify as part of the final environmental impact statement or other standards. So again, we will be consulting with regulatory agencies on these parameters and talking about what they are. We do have a water quality certificate right now that has certain key parameters that were brought about as part of the settlement discussion as being the key parameters of interest, and we have standards for those and a protocol in place for if there's exceedances. So we're going to need to go back and go consult with the regulatory agencies to work through this question here. But again, I will say once again, the final environmental impact statement is representative of the entire Hudson River and not necessarily your section of the Hudson River. Question 27 is what modification has TDI contemplated should monitoring data show a need based on current project design? Can they be implemented when the jet plowing is within a half mile of any intake? So the easy answer to this question is that the turbidity levels associated with the project are can be reduced if we slow down the rate of installation. And it's specifically talked about as one of the approaches one might take if the levels of TSS start to rise. This practice can be initiated, upon, decision to make it happen. So certainly could be within this parameter asked about in this question. Question 28 deals with the graph. And I guess there was a miscommunication here. Let me bring up this graph here. So we included this as part of our discussion last time around. You can see down here at the bottom, the surface is a triangle, the midpoint is a square, and the bottom is a triangle is a surface, square is a mid depth, circle is the bottom. And there are places up here where it rises, but what we meant to say last week, and apologies if we were not clear about it, but within your area of interest, which starts around milepost 244 and goes through to Lloyd at milepost 260, you can see that there's a flat lining down here. All the levels are at or below 10 all the way through. So that's what we meant to say. If there was a miscommunication, we sorry about that. And we think that 10 milligrams per liter for TSS is completely compatible with, or at least within the same range as what operators see throughout the year. But again, this is one of these areas where we want the opportunity to talk to the operators to find out what their normal operating parameters are, what they're normally seeing when they're operating their facility, so that we build this program with the level of detail that we understand what's happening. Question 29. And Gene, I think this is where you take over.
Yes, so question 29, this relates to costs associated with the drinking water impacts. And question 29 is TDI willing to pay for interconnections to other water systems before jet plowing? For one utility, the cost could be $1 million for a temporary connection and $3 million for a permanent connection. Our answer is, based on what we understand the current situation is, the data and analysis, we don't see any need for this type of temporary interconnection. 30, what is the insurance amount that TDI carries for consequential damages if our intakes are contaminated? The permittee and its installation subcontractor will establish appropriate insurance coverages. based on the assessment of risk and based on a practical understanding of the operations of the public water systems and the potential impacts of the CHPE project. We don't have a lot of comment to make about consequential damages. We want a foundation for our operation and its impacts to be established. And right now, of course, classic insurances will be carried. One of the things that I think that has been raised is the notion that we might potentially impact an intake. That was mentioned in the last meeting. This is a custom designed barge that has its own propulsion systems and it's a DP2 barge. So at all times there's a computer global positioning system on that barge, and that barge we'll know where that barge is exactly plus or minus 3 feet. Secondly, we are going to be surveying the Hudson River by diver to confirm where co-located utilities are, including these intakes. So we feel very, very confident that any chance of damaging these intakes is absolutely minimal, if not just not even feasible, respective of the project. The Hudson 7 communities have limited water storage capacity. In the event that contamination makes the Hudson unusable for even relatively short periods of time, what contingency planning has or will be done to allow for the rapid provision of alternative water supplies to affected communities? Should their supply be contaminated? Who will who will bear the cost of this? Once again, we don't, see any basis for a conclusion that will be necessary. And, we really don't have any comment about bearing the cost for a condition we don't think will present itself. And I think that, concludes the questions. I'm going to turn it over to Jen for a minute just to talk a bit about where we go from here. And then, of course, we can open the floor up to some Q&A. Hey, Jen.
Thanks, Gene. Well, I wanted to thank you all for a great collection of questions and for this opportunity. The next step in our process is to start meeting with departments of health and the operators of water intakes to better understand the current operations, the monitoring of water quality, regulatory standards. These should be in the forefront of our mind for all of these discussions. And then we'd like to come back and meet with the Hudson 7 again after we've had the opportunity to collect all of that important data and have those important conversations. I also wanted to say that we are going to create a document that we will post to our website and share with anyone who would like it, that includes the questions and the answers that we've gone over today. But thank you again, everybody.
Okay.
We
Yeah,
start asking questions?
thank you. Wait 1 second, Randy. Hey, thank you, Sean. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Jay. I'm going to open the floor up to questions. As I mentioned before, I want to give priority to our Hudson 7 members first, who have spent a lot of time working on these questions, whether they be board members or technical advisors. Okay. So if somebody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand. I'll identify you and we can go forward. I see Randy with your hand up.
Yeah, it's Randy Allstat. One of the things you're going to be doing on this burial is you're going to go across around 37 utilities, and as a result, you're going to go above ground. Are you considering going above ground near our utilities so that maybe you won't impact us?
Sorry, are you talking in water? We're going above ground?
Yeah, in water and under the bottom of the river, but above the
Okay,
bottom of the river.
so there
Yeah,
are
Let
places.
me answer that, Sean. So,
Great.
Randy, the answer is that that will be a decision that's made based on the physical verification of those utilities. So if we have sufficient depth to that utility, we will go right over it with the trench, obviously. If that utility is within our burial parameters, we will utilize a mattressing scheme. And the answer to your question is yes, we would consider within the parameters of our permits and within the parameters of our requirements through the Corps and the maritime community, potentially crossing, over, the utility, the intake, it's somewhere away from the intake itself.
Okay, so that's something we'll talk about later. Another question, the dredging. We have a lot of contaminants around Poughkeepsie. There's 7 acres of underground contamination, and you guys are going to come through in 2025. I'm not certain they're going to be done by then. They hopefully will, but there's a lot of contaminants of PCBs in that area, so you need to be aware of that.
Thank you. Maybe it would be helpful also. I mean, again, we did our best to try to stay pertinent to the questions, but one of the things that, we have a whole regime of requirements relative to being on the Hudson River that are set of rules, notification rules, traffic control rules, publishing and notification rules. All of those rules have been issued by the United States Coast Guard. And, those will be in place and will provide a lot more detail about exactly where we are, how we will pass existing activity, et cetera. So I think that would, maybe somewhat helpful to the question.
And I think Central Hudson had expected to be completed with the dredging well before you're coming there. But based upon the testing we've done and the work we've done with Central Hudson, it may not be. So it's something that we should all work together to coordinate because it is a concern.
Yeah, we'll make a note of that, Randy.
When you're doing this jet plow, have you done 8 foot deep with a foot width trench in a estuary?
There's been a lot of these projects done throughout the world. They've been done in the Thames estuary. They've been done in France in the estuaries. There's a lot of information utilizing this plow technology. I don't have specifics on that, but they certainly are available. And there's also a public document that we have provided called the Navigational Risk Assessment that has an analysis of the Hudson River and also has related experience that supports the data and conclusions of that analysis. And that includes a number of installations that were done in river environments.
And one more, I would like you to give me the information that you would like to share with Dr. Chant. And I would also think it might be good for Sean and Dr. Chant to discuss things. And I'm more than happy to be negotiating through that. But I think that I would like that kind of support from him so that we can go forward with your project.
Yeah, Randy, that's consistent with what we talked about earlier. I think that we would want to send him the water quality modeling that was done, some of the other information. I can certainly put that together with you and happy to get on the phone with him.
That sounds great. That's my questions.
Hello, Paul.
Yeah, I'm following up on Randy's question. Randy asked if you had done this in estuaries, and you said yes. But I'm wondering if you have done it in estuaries where there is drinking water intakes. Specifically, you just did not answer that question as part of question number 16. And that's probably very important to me. We don't want to be the first people on the block to try this new procedure close to our drinking water intakes.
Yeah, so we're gonna, I think we committed to you in the last time of connecting the construction person who'd be doing this with you and having that conversation. We haven't done it yet, but it doesn't mean it's not on our list of things to do. And I can't speak specifically to their experience of this call right here. I don't want to say something that's not true. So.
Yeah,
Sean,
what
have
I
you-
will say, once again, Paul, is that there have been many installations utilizing jet plow technology in river environments. The specific interaction of that installation and water intakes, I do not know off the cuff. I presume, and I think it's reasonable to assume, that there have been water intakes on the Thames, water intakes on, in France. There's been a lot of very significant water bodies. I'm sure that the water is taken from those rivers. I'm sure that there has been examples of this technique used, but I do not have specific information on that.
Well, that's great, but I'd like to get specific information on those locations and Caldwell's experience with that. The other question, maybe it didn't read right or whatever, was about the confidential drawings. Sean basically said that the last time when I asked why they weren't located on your drawings, he said that because of security reasons, you didn't locate them. And I accept that answer. That's definitely a good answer. We're all very concerned about the security. What we're asking for is for you to locate it on drawings that would only be confidential with us. That only we would see it. So we could see what your planning was compared to it. And we're having a hard time doing it because the latitudes and longitudes are not located on any of the drawings we have. So it's kind of hard for us to locate the intakes precisely.
Well, so, and I should say that, as I said earlier, that we will be relying on the information that was given to us as part of our FOIL request and then our individual conversations with the operators. So we have an approximate location that's for, when the letter came out from the Hudson 7 that showed the approximate location of the route against the intakes, we did a side by side and said, yeah, those look right. I guess we'll see what we can find see if we've improved on that at all. But as Gene sort of alluded to earlier, one of the things that's going to happen before we get, before we're in the water doing construction is divers will be in the water. So there will be precise locations for where the intakes are. And the location for where the route is right now is the place where we think the route is going to be subject to confirmation for engineering reasons and other concerns like you've raised.
And I would add to Sean's comments that I think we've been clear that we want to have a consultation with the operators, and we want to do whatever we can to accommodate the operators and the intake locations, with the proviso that will be impacted by our current permits, by our current conditions from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, by our studies on maritime interaction. So it'll be a balance, but we will do whatever we can to accommodate, the operators and locate this cable pair, these two 5-inch cables in the least, impactful way that we can.
Dean, I really appreciate that you're thinking about the operators and working with them. I'm concerned that might be too late to make a decision whether we should be in the water or not, or out of the water. And I'm also kind of concerned is that our operators, some of them are very young, some of them don't have a lot of experience. You know, Randy by far is the most knowledgeable person in water treatment and water resources. But the others, I'm not sure if they would understand, and I'm not sure whether your consultation with them will be too late for us to do anything at that time. It's just going to be, okay, as you said, Gene, we're going to do the best we can, but how do we know the best we can is the best?
Well, we can't prove the unprovable, you know, that's a very tough thing to do. But, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, I want to be really clear about one thing. The idea that we're going to relocate this project out of the Hudson River and onto land that's not going to happen. Okay. So there's no chance we're going to redo the 10 years we've been working on this project, all the science, all the evidence, everything that we've done now to get to this 10 years later, and ignore that 10 years and move our cables out of the river. We will provide the evidence that we've suggested about the reasonableness and the basis for that reasonableness of being in the river and the influence of the regulators and everybody who consulted on this project to end up with this route. We've discussed this now, I think 3 times now, and the idea that we're going to relocate this project out of the river is not a solution for this project. We cannot replicate the time, the expense, and we believe that our record, I want to be clear, we believe our record supports us being in the Hudson River.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I looked at your alternative analysis and of land routes, and it is very thorough. I drove some of them myself, and a lot of things you're right about. But you totally missed the question whether you have talked to New York State Thruway since your first initial contact that Sean mentioned when you started the project, and they said no at that time. Now they seem to be more lenient on, they were willing to provide an oil pipeline from Albany to New Jersey. So I don't see why you wouldn't be looking at that to avoid the maritime, the environmentalists, us, and all that. I can, especially since a route has already been determined for the Pilgrim pipeline, which it will not be built.
We have attempted to explain how we ended up with the route, that it was a very comprehensive process. It was based on a tremendous amount of input and a tremendous amount and a foundation of science and a balance of interests across a broad spectrum of folks. We didn't end up with the route that we have today arbitrarily. I know that I'll mention this, I know it's not really germane, but we're $100 million into this project at this point, north of that. Okay, I know that's not of pertinence to you folks, but 10 years of working with regulators, 10 years of working, we have invested a lot of money to address the issues that you're talking about, and we remain convinced that we have addressed them comprehensively, adequately. And by the way, we think the ultimate, conclusion that is the fact that we have all those permits from the federal and the state who grant such permits, including the environmental considerations associated with them. We'd like to do everything we can to support within reason to accommodate. We do not want to negatively impact the intake, the intakes for this water supply. We want to be there and gone and have no impact whatsoever. That's our goal. That was the goal when the analysis was done.
Yeah, once again, Gene, you still have not answered my question. Has the New York State Thruway alternative been looked at, and has it been given enough analysis?
You're asking me the same question like 4 times.
Because you're not answering my question.
No,
So-
we have looked at every available alternative within reason for the project. That's my answer. And we're not going to go back today in 2021 and ask about a material change and setting this project back to day one. We're not going to do that because we have no reason to do that.
Okay, I understand your
Paul, hey,
position.
Paul, I'd like to move on to Emily for a second, and we can come back if we have more questions, okay? I want to give everybody a chance. So, Emily?
Thanks, Gary. I know others have questions too. I just have 2 questions. The first is you've mentioned, I guess what I'm hearing today overall is that you're not really willing to make any changes as a result of the requests that we put in, but you say that you'll consider them at some further stage as you refine the plan with the input of the operators, and you're going to be talking to the health department and things like that. And I apologize if maybe I missed this, but I'm just wondering if you could just really clearly lay out what the next steps are that you see, so that we understand how you expect to actually conduct these consultations. Because at this point, it just sounds like just wait and we'll get back to you. And maybe that's okay, but I don't really understand what the timeline is or what the steps are that we should be expecting. Is that something you could give us a little bit more detail on?
Sure. Do you want me to take that, Gene?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So the process has always been that the permitting that we have from the state of New York is a siting permitting. It says that this is where you can put the project here, subject to these conditions, and those conditions included things like consultation with water treatment operators, like consultation with co-location infrastructure. All of the actual details, how we're going to do this, the construction, the timing for this is supposed to be brought in as part of what's called an environmental management and construction plan.
Mm-hmm.
Those need to be submitted to the Public Service Commission. There's a public review of those. And at the end of that process, we will actually be segmenting that out. So we'll be doing one for this part of the overland, one for Lake Champlain, one for the so it won't be one giant document for the entire route, but it will be broken down, which is going to be useful for you in terms of being able to look at the things that you're most concerned about will be in one EMCP. There's no timeline in the sense of we don't have any statutory timelines in terms of when we're doing this. But as you can imagine, a project this complex, there are a lot of pieces that need to be brought together as part of this. So I want to be clear, when we say want to talk to the operators, we're not being dismissive of your concerns you're raising. We appreciate them. We want those concerns to be on our front of our heads when we're talking to the operators. We want to have those concerns be top of our head when we're developing the EM and CP. But the project right here is still in the development stage. We haven't actually sort of said, and now we begin the formal engineering process that kicks off the development of the EMCP. So we're happy to have this conversation with you, but in our heads, and this may be just us, it's a little premature in the sense of the consultation requirements under the EMCP. Again, happy to have it. This input is actually going to be very helpful for us in terms of crafting our document, because we need to make sure that we come up with a document that satisfies the concerns of the state agencies like Department of Public Service, DEC, Department of Health may weigh in on the EMCP, and the communities themselves can weigh in on these documents as well. So I don't have a formal timeline in front of me right now for doing this. Happy to do it. I mean, happy to sort of sit back. I'm not going to do it on the cuff, because again, I try not to give information that 2 weeks from now I'm like mea culpa type thing. But
if you can, if you can maybe get back to us with a more specific time, maybe not timeline's the wrong word, but the sequence of events of when would be the right time for us to have these discussions, because our operators are regulated by the health department, so we're working within that context also. So would your consultation with the health department be all at the same time? Is this all something that happens together through that EMCP?
So it's going to happen before the EMCP. While apologies if we weren't clear in the presentation because I do talk way too fast. We want to talk to the operators so we understand what are they currently monitoring for? What do they normally see in their facility? What turbidity levels do they see? Paul's brought up the POCs a number of times. What is that? What are they regulated for right now? How are they monitoring? We want to understand how their facilities operate, what are they already looking for, and what they normally expect. As I showed in the graph, we're expecting an increase of 10 milligrams per liter of total suspended solids. What's their threshold for pain, and when do they become concerned about that sort of thing? And then we also need to meet with Department of Health. And as I think we indicated in the presentation, we did have an initial conversation with the New York State Department of Health just a couple of weeks ago, and we expect to have more conversations with them. And they've very specifically said to us, you should talk to the county Department of Health because those are, directly involved in the operators. So we want to understand what the county's concerned Department of Health are when looking at this project as well. Putting those together, what are the regulatory environment? What are the operating procedures right now? And then moving forward. I don't know if I want to commit to a timeline to you, but I think your suggestion of a sequence of events, a bullet point, here's phase 1, here's phase 2, here's phase 3, that leads up to the development of the EMCP, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
That would be helpful. And like, when does the pilot testing happen? Just try to explain to us what order all those things happen. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and Emily, I would make a point to you that I think we made the last time we were together, that we intend to be actually installing this cable in the Hudson River in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like this is going to happen tomorrow. So, this consultation we're doing is to try to make sure that we're doing the right thing. That's it in essence.
And can
a clarification to yours if you're not done, Emily, when you're done, Emily?
I have a different question, but go ahead if you have something.
Yeah, just on the same question that Emily raised. So I just want to understand that the EMCP, will that potentially modify aspects of things like the water quality and sediment plan that specify specific monitoring locations, monitoring levels that, that the Hudson 7 has raised the concerns about, specifically saying, if you're monitoring here, for this parameter, you're missing the chance of our contamination reaching our intake, for instance, or if you're not monitoring at our raw intake, you're monitoring at the project site. So will the EMCP modify those statements that appear to be already conditions that are established? So I just want to understand how they get modified.
Yeah, no, there are conditions that there's sort of the baseline conditions for the project. We will do, pre-construction. We will do monitoring, pre-construction monitoring. We will do monitoring during it for these parameters as identified. Sorry, I really thought I had turned off my phone. Funny little COVID world. We'll have, but at that point too, it will talk about the EMCP will also talk about specific things that are, not necessarily specific certificate conditions, but things that the applicants are doing as part of their overall process.
And it will also delineate final routing. So you will see
enforceable in the same way then? Oh, I'm sorry, Gene, excuse me.
No, I was going to say it will delineate final routing as, arrived at. What I will say is that sort of it's our view, and I hope that we imparted this clearly, but it's our view that when we went through this permitting regime with the Corps and all the folks that we've mentioned, that we took the best science that was available to us at that time. Okay. If we talk to the Department of Health or we talk to folks and we see we're missing something, there's something that we should be doing to protect water systems that are intakes in the Hudson River, we're certainly going to do those things. Of course we are. But again, we want that to be science-based. We want to understand this is what we've been trying to communicate. So we don't want to go to the operators to try to explain the stipulations and all of the data that's been generated for this project. What we want to go is say, okay, like we've had we've had information from the operators that show turbidity levels that range dramatically, direct input from the operators. Okay, what does that mean from a practical perspective? What does it mean from a practical perspective? How do you guys test? What do you currently test for? How can we augment that? I mean, we just want to get to an operational and practical level so that we do this in a way that we achieve our objective. And our objective is to bring this cable down the Hudson River and to not impact these water systems at all. That is our objective. And that was our objective through this very exhaustive permitting process that we went through, where we took everything that we could understand at that time.
Yeah. So Dan, your question about what's enforceable, the EMCP is enforceable. I mean, it is a formal document approved by the Public Service Commission that says you will build the project according to these specifications with these conditions to it. It's just a higher level of detail than you normally see in a certificate condition. And we're going to have to, we talked earlier about nighttime installation. We have language in there that says we try to be there in nighttime or as otherwise determined by the operators. We don't have to be there in the nighttime. Again, that was what we were told was the best way of doing it. If there's a better time to go through and the operators say, boy, I really want you to come through at this time of day because that's when I'm fully staffed and I want to be ready. I don't know if anything's going to happen rather than have a skeleton crew. Great. Let's know that. That's the kind of conversation that we would like to have, Emily, with them.
And everything when you do an engineering and construction, everything's a trade-off, right? So the trade-off is how quickly we get by these systems. If we can't do it, it's all trade-off. If we can't do it at night and we have to slow down the installation, there's all trade-offs, that we do.
And the other potential is you have intake systems that are right across from each other, more or less.
Right.
We're going to have those operators agree. We can't have one saying come through at nighttime and the other one comes through at noon. We're going to need to sort of work that through, and we kind of hope that the Hudson 7 will be a helpful resource in terms of resolving those sort of issues.
Yeah, we would love.
Can I move on 1 second to Emily?
Sorry.
Shannon. Shannon has a question.
Can I just finish my? I'll make my second question just into.
Sorry, Emily. I thought you were done.
That's okay. That's okay, Gary. And I do definitely want to get to Shannon. Yeah, and I think this is important because, the problem is that we have learned a lot more in the last 10 years since you started this process. We know a lot more about PCBs now. We know more about coal tar. There's just a lot more information that's come up. And so, and we can't just tell our residents, well, 10 years ago, we didn't know about it. So, so obviously we all need to work with the current knowledge that we have and do the best we can for the residents. And my second question, which I'll just leave as a statement because I want to move on, but we did have a question about what you would do if we face a need to shut down or if we face a contamination issue because of this project. And the answer that I heard was more or less that you just didn't expect that to happen. And that's just not going to be an acceptable answer for our community. So maybe when you do your written answers, you can think more about how to answer that question, because that doesn't satisfy what happens to us if our system gets shut down and our residents don't have water. So thanks.
Thank you, Emily. All right, Shannon, are you still there?
Muted, Shannon.
Shannon, we can't, you're getting a lot of background noise. Shannon, we can't hear you. You're getting feedback through the speaker system.
Shannon, why don't I send you the phone number and you can call in, okay? I'll do that now.
Okay, well, that's happening. Randy, you have another question?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that the environmental impact statement was done well over 10 years or somewhat around 10 years ago. And as Emily was just talking about, there's a lot of other information given. And I think as we look towards our concerns, we could also look towards the fact that maybe a new environmental impact statement needs to be done to address the concerns that were overlooked during the original.
Thank you, Randy. I think we're waiting for Shannon to call in. I hear a lot of conversations that need to be happening with operators, so I'd like to make a statement that, you know, collectively our operators, you know, work closely with us, Hudson 7. And so dealing with just the operators may not just be the answer in terms of we need to work together with our operators, with you to, you know, go through this project.
Yeah, I don't, and hopefully I didn't convey that the intent was to not communicate again with the Hudson 7, but it simply was that we wanted to talk to people, you know, on the ground.
Shannon, are you there? You're muted, Shannon.
Gary, you got to turn that. Thank you. Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I can't hear you, but I'm just gonna say make my comments. You know, we think hydroelectric is good. We understand New York City needs this energy, and so we're not against your project. Our focus is that your very important project does not get stigmatized by knocking out a water supply. And we know when you dredge, you are going to resuspend PCBs and whatever other industrial charged particles are in the sediment. So, you know, when those PCBs get resuspended and are absorbed in our drinking water treatment process, God forbid it happens, it will be a horrible thing for our community and your company. So please try and work with us. You know, if you can come out of the water for this portion of the Hudson River and it's feasible, then come out of the water. We really don't want to be raising drinking water safety issues, but you're kind of forcing us to do that by not being specific about what kinds of tests you've done, what kind of fixes, engineering fixes and otherwise you're proposing. If you are so confident that our water supply is not going to be affected by this dredging, then prove to us how it won't be. Where are your studies? Where is your modeling of the plume? We want some kind of monitoring system put in place to ensure the safety of our drinking water. My water treatment operators who are behind me, I have the whole Esopus water treatment plant listening into this. They tell me that May to September is the worst time to run your project. So it's not that we don't support your project. We don't want your project to get derailed and stigmatized by completely disrupting our drinking water. And I think there's a high chance of that from everything I'm hearing in your presentation and the lack of testing and ready fixes and planning that hasn't taken place yet to account for our water safety and our water intake valves right at the point where you're dredging.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, she
I think
can.
there was
She just
an,
needs
yeah.
to thumbs up.
And she can.
Okay, so thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. We appreciate you having your operators there for this discussion. It's an important conversation for them to hear as well. I think that we would say that we have done exactly the things that you've asked for. We have done water quality modeling for this stretch of for all of the Hudson River and Lake Champlain. It's a matter of public record. It was reviewed and included as part of the joint proposal for settlement. We have looked at we have done sediment testing along the waterway. We have included certificate conditions that related to protection. And we, in this presentation, talked, if there's an issue in terms of excessive levels of total suspended solids, that there's an easy fix of just slowing down the rate of installation. The rate of installation right now is about 300 feet per hour. So we'll be zipping through. But if it turns out when we get down to that stretch, if the TSSs or the turbidity levels rise to an unacceptable level, then we will slow down the rate of operation, which will slow down both of those metrics, which are really what the concern are. That's how the sedimentation gets into the system, is the suspended solids, and if we can keep those levels to low and as consistent with what's already existing within the area. I should also say too that the PCBs that we're not unconcerned about PCBs. We agreed to a standard for testing for PCBs along the waterway that's consistent with drinking water standards in that area. So it's not that we're unaware of PCBs. We rerouted the project overland in around the Albany area to avoid the PCB mitigation project that was happening at the time. But we hear what you're saying, and we want to, if we need to provide more documents to you in terms of what we've done for previous analysis and whatnot, please let us know what you'd like to see, and I'm sure in our archive we can provide that to you.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add to Sean's comments is that, the word dredge and what we're going to do to install these cables are materially different things. So remember, we're putting 2 5-inch cables in vertically into a 3-foot trench. So the idea of the disturbances that I know everybody's sensitized to recently with the work that's taken place in the river, we think we're in a totally different situation. And as Sean said, what you suggested we should be doing, we believe we have, including continuous monitoring, including committing to monitoring with your operators. And, that's one of the reasons why we're, looking for those consultations.
Hey, Paul, we do have one person that wants to ask a question.
Sure.
Let me
Go
just
ahead.
go to there. I'm going to read the question. This is from Jim Teed, who's still on the line. Jim asks, can you share the links to the Hudson Partners transmission project monitoring data? Also, can you share the links to the water proposal, specifically the 3D hydrodynamic model and the time model for this section of the Hudson River?
Jim is with DOH.
Yes, I can try. I can certainly provide for you the water quality monitoring. I don't know if we have the actual transmission monitoring data itself, the raw data, but I can look for that for you as well.
Okay.
If you can share that with me, I can share it with Jim.
Great.
Paul.
I just wanted to kind of emphasize what Shannon was saying. It's hard for us as community leaders to say to the public, we don't have a plan if something goes wrong. We're positive that everything will work, but we don't have a plan. And I think that's what the Texas Power Company told people, that we'll never have a snowstorm or cold weather like this. So that's why it's so important to have some sort of emergency plan, adequate insurance, and be able to convince us that, that you have insurance for contingencies and a plan.
Okay, well, I'm going to read another question. This was asked earlier by Ulster County Legislator Laura Petit. What infrastructure give back are you offering to the communities this impacts? Alternative water sources, treatment center upgrades, or storage towers?
Gene, you want to take that one? It's pretty related to the question you answered.
Currently, we don't have any plans to build infrastructure to augment the water systems. Because it's our view that we don't have any data that tells us that's necessary. So in consultation, we're looking to generate more data and update that data. And we're prepared to do that. And we're also believe in, we've said it many, many times now in 3 meetings, that there is a comprehensive regime to test. There has been modeling done. There has been sampling done. We've done quite a bit of work with the regulators so that we can pass these intakes, in a manner that doesn't affect them. And so we're prepared to continue to discuss this as we've suggested and build on that base of information that we have, but we're not prepared to offer, any solutions for additional infrastructure or for consequential damages or any of that in the absence of a set of facts that call for those investments.
Gene, I think this question is also related to Emily's previous question, and that's why I'm asking it. And I'll reread Emily's last question is, what is your plan if we have a problem and we have to shut down? So you said, that was a statement basically that Emily made earlier. I think we need to address that situation.
Yeah, and I think that we will have active monitoring of the installation. We will understand what the monitoring scheme will be at the intakes. We'll pass those intakes. We've already said this now several times in consultation with the water systems. Hopefully, and again, there was no discussion of this whatsoever, but hopefully we can coordinate the operation of that system to the best off-peak period possible. Hopefully there'll be existing storage. We can pass by that intake in a way that is absolutely minimally impactful, if impactful at all. Certainly that's our goal. And certainly we want to demonstrate to this team that we will be compliant with that goal to the greatest extent possible.
And the other thing, and again, in terms of contingency planning, I think we also need to talk to the operators to find out what their contingency planning is. I mean, Randy, I really want the opportunity to sit down with you and talk about, what do you do when your TSS levels reach a certain level? What do you do when they reach another level? We'll need to understand sort of what happens. We don't want to come up with a contingency plan that's completely alien and foreign to what is already in place for the operators. And that's part of our conversation with the operators. It's part of our conversation with Department of Health. As I said earlier, these are all good questions to ask. These are questions we're going to look into, but at this point, we haven't sort of gotten into them because there's, again, no data to support that that's an issue.
I mean, does the Hudson 7 have a contingency plan for a maritime issue? I mean, you have crude oil going up and down the Hudson River, continually, barged crude oil. Is that crude oil, they should run aground, or is there a contingency plan in the water systems for that? Do you have insurance from those maritime operators and a consequential damage offer from them if that happens? I'm just curious, because that's going on and you're right by your water intakes, on a weekly basis.
And so, Gene, I'm going to answer that, and maybe others can add into it, but just like working with you for the first time ever, we've been really engaged with the Coast Guard in their simulation drills, and we will continue to be involved. And we are working very closely with them for a contingency plan. but it's a plan about prevention, right? And that's what, and they've been very open, and it's just that everything is put on hold COVID, but we're working closely with the Coast Guard on exactly that.
And by the way, TDI was right next to you when we denied their anchorages, and we put in all the evidence to support the idea of minimizing those new anchorages they were trying to put in place that included anchorages that are near this location. So we were right there. We submitted letters, we submitted evidence that ultimately caused those anchorages not to be approved by the United States Coast Guard. So we were right next to you. And remember, these cables have no fluid. There's nothing in these cables that can be released into the water. So we're strictly talking about the excavation, the installation of these two 5-inch cables vertically aligned in a 3-foot trench down to 7 feet to top of cable, which I don't think has much of a relationship, again, to the current dredging that's occurring. Many issues that have heightened this, I think, and I also think will continue, as we suggested, to provide information that, again, gets you folks more up to speed with what has occurred, respective of the questions. We'll continue to provide more detail that supports that.
Randy.
I think part of the concern is that, we don't have contingency plans. The Hudson River is our source. We don't look for other places. And it's been since 1872, Poughkeepsie's used the Hudson River and never had the problem. We are very, very concerned about the oil tankers that go up and down the river, that travel down the railroad. And every concern is that's why there's the Hudson 7. And now that we have more traffic and more things going on, the Hudson 7 is standing out to look out for protection of our customers. And that's why we're here. And that's why we're asking these questions.
We get it. That's why we're here.
Any other questions?
I have another, if no one else does. I think Emily suggested or pointed towards this a little bit, but the whole Hudson River is a Superfund site for PCBs, and part of that's because the fish are contaminated from primarily from the sources upriver. But there's also well known that PCBs have flowed down over the Troy Dam and are probably in hot spots in the lower river, and those have never been investigated. Can your EMCP include testing along the route that is at a great enough frequency to provide any assurance that you're not going to hit a PCB hotspot that we're today not aware of, but might be there? I think you referenced, Sean, using available data. And I think this is a case where we know the data we need is not available and needs to be generated. So will there be an opportunity to gather that kind of sediment testing data along the route to inform the route, to inform the monitoring plans, et cetera, because of that known unknown, if you will?
So I would have to go back and look at what our compliance plan. I know we do have one that's related to sediment, but I don't know if it relates to PCBs in general, and I don't want to, again, speak out of turn. We do have, as I talked about, monitoring, I think we tested within the Hudson River at least every 2 miles, if not every mile, for certain contaminants. And there's no reason why I would assume that if the route is more or less in those areas, there would be a dramatic change. I suspect that if we got down to it and you and I talked about, what an adequate number of samples is, there would probably be a deviation in terms of our, what the word adequate encompassed. So, but, and that's just the nature of this whole process, is that when we look at these things, we look at the amount of, testing we did and say, yes, that's sufficient. And this whole conversation is based on people saying, well, wait, could there be more? And the answer is yes. As G alluded to, you can't disprove the negative. We could never say nothing ever is going to happen, but the preponderance of evidence is indicates that. So let me get back to you on that question, Dan, in terms of what we're required to do for testing. Let me also talk to Gene. I know that they are doing some sediment work out there. I just want to make sure that I don't misrepresent what that refers to and whether or not it's actually useful to your question.
Hey, Paul.
I was just wondering if Gene and Sean could share their experience with jet plowing. Have they been on one of these boats that have done jet plowing, and what's been their experience? What have they noticed? And how do they see the operation going? What's their experience with this?
So my experience on the boat itself is non-existent because I don't need to be on the boat. That's why we hire Caldwell with their 20 plus years of experience to be doing this work, and why we have those individuals as part of the team. What I can tell you is that I have been doing this and in this environment for well over 10 years now. And when an HVDC project is brought up, I go and take a look at it. For example, a very smart man I know once recommended I go take a look at the Little Bay project over in New Hampshire. And I went to go look at that and looked at that data, and it's pretty consistent with what we saw in our testing data as well. They did pre-testing, and those results were consistent with what our modeling and what their modeling showed as well. So, I mean, I'm not the person to be on the boat any more than I'm the person anymore who goes out and delineates the wetlands. But I understand the science behind them and look at the science and have looked at the literature related to it to understand how it all comes together.
I have been on the boats, both ocean and river-based boats. Worked with cable laying and utilizing a shear plow, and as well as a jet plow. And I've also been on clearing operations. I would encourage you, Paul, to take a look at the Caldwell Marine website. I think that there is a tremendous amount of detail on that website about actual projects, including projects that are local to the Hudson River, including a jet plow that was utilized for 15-foot depth installation in the New York Harbor, which I think I mentioned before. So, and I think the last time that we met, I showed a picture of that actual jet plow. I would encourage you again to take a look at that, because there's a lot of very, good, support for the experience of CMI, both relative to the technology and relative to the local area that we are in.
Yeah, I have looked at that website and it is quite impressive, but I was not able to find a project in an estuary close to water intakes.
I see the hand up from Ramapo. You have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Ninjusinzi Al, I'm Al from the Ramapo Lenape Nation, Muncie Lenape Nation, and we're the descendants of the original people of Manhattan, and our traditional lands include lands south of Albany and the Mohawk River shed. And it's come to my attention that the Innu Nation of Labrador asked the Canadian regulator to halt the Hydro-Quebec plan. I was wondering if you all could talk about that and what the status there is. And also, the Innu Nation has said that this project violates the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And yes, I'm kind of coming late to this discussion, but if you could also address any issues that have arisen with with NAGPRA, the Native American Grave Repatriations Act, as well as any of the historical and archaeological issues along with the project, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So let me start with the US-based cultural resources part of the question. We did go through, as part of the development of the project, we did go through Section 106, National Historic Preservation Act consultation. There's an excellent record of that on the Department of Energy's website that if you sent me an email, I'd be happy to pass along to you. We did reach out to the tribes within New York and invited them to be part of consultation, invited them to sign on to a programmatic agreement. You're going to have to forgive me. I've reached that age where I don't remember all the details of who signed it, but there certainly was consultation that went into that. We completed phase 1 ESA cultural resources assessments for the entire route. And we will be doing phase 2 cultural resources assessments along the route. And as part of the programmatic agreement, there is language in there related to the discovery of remains. And forgive me if I haven't got the right terminology. That was recently updated by the New York State Historic Preservation Office. And so the programmatic agreement will reflect that new guidance offered.
And also observation by them, during construction and procedures to address anything that we find.
Yep.
Relative to your question about the Quebec and Hydro-Quebec, it's actually a very complicated situation and involves a lot more Native Americans than the Inuit. So there's deals with a lot of folks up there that are Native American. The Mohawks have deals. Lots of people have deals with Hydro-Quebec. We're not in a position to comment on that because we're not really privy to those negotiations or those deals. But I know that there is a consistent and constant dialogue between those folks and Hydro-Quebec. And this issue has the attention of Hydro-Quebec all the way up to the CEO.
Okay.
Thank you for your response.
Yeah. Any other questions?
No, but someone's just direct messaged me asking for my email address, and I am too old for that. So I've just put my email address up there for everybody if they want to get in touch with me. It's not a secret or anything. And if you'd like me to communicate with you or give you some of this information, I'd be happy to do so.
All right. Well, I thank everybody for their input and the response to the questions. This has been a very important meeting for us and a very good exchange of information. And as we said in the beginning, this is just part of what we are trying to do to get information, and we were not planning on taking any actions as a result of this meeting. And we're looking forward to reconvening at some other time when we have time to review and go over everything that was discussed today. Right. So without any, I'd always like, it's great if I can give back time. And I think we have like about 8 minutes. And if I can give everybody back 8 minutes at the end of a Thursday, which has been a bright day here, I'm going to take advantage of it. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting for today, and we will correspond again later.
Okay, thank you, Gary.
Thank you all.
You all have